Hello and welcome to Aging on the Suncoast. I am attorney Mai Vu and a board member of the Area Agency on Aging for Pasco and Pinellas County. We're excited to bring you today's episode on hurricane recovery and the legal perspective. The Older Americans Act, passed in 1965, is a federal law designed to support older Americans in living independently in their own homes. This act created the National Aging Network, which includes the area agencies on aging, to fund, develop, coordinate, and plan for services in the communities that benefit older adults. A wide array of services and initiatives are funded through this act to support older adults to remain active, healthy, and safe in their own homes. Services include nutrition services, health and wellness classes, elder abuse prevention education, transportation, home care services, and legal assistance. We are fortunate to have Bay Area Legal, Gulf Coast Legal, and the Community Law Program, as well as many private attorneys in our area to assist us with legal issues. Most of us experienced the unprecedented impact of 2 hurricanes in our community. Many residents experienced the loss of power, damage, or destruction to their homes, displacement of where they lived, and the significant disruption of our life experience. Recovering from the aftermath of a natural disaster like the 2 hurricanes we experienced this year is a topic that is important to all of us, and I'm happy to welcome attorney Jason Susalla to have this conversation with me today. Jason Susalla is the Disaster Relief Team Managing Attorney for Bay Area Legal Services. Starting in 2019, he grew the firm's disaster relief project to a full legal team, including the statewide Florida Disaster Legal Aid Helpline, which represents survivors of natural disasters. Jason joined Bay Area Legal in 2009 as an intern in the Community Counsel program. Since 2013, he has been an attorney at the firm, working in several practice areas, including senior advocacy, fair housing, and domestic violence. Jason earned his law degree from the Florida Coastal School of Law and his bachelor degree from the University of Florida. Jason, thank you for joining me today. Welcome.
Thank you.
So Jason, what are some of the common concerns you are hearing from seniors when they are seeking legal advice from your office?
So following a disaster incident, we see a wide scope of concerns coming from the community regarding a variety of issues that they're having in disaster response and recovery. Some of these are pretty obvious when we think about disaster relief issues. We think about folks who have issues with FEMA appeals, folks who have issues with insurance, but the scope is quite wider than that. Folks are calling in with issues such as landlord-tenant issues, where they're having issues with their landlords who are doing things they shouldn't. We have issues where people are being denied assistance for the Small Business Administration. We have contractor issues, and even family law issues as well. So when it comes down to what people are calling in with, it's pretty much a bit of everything with regard to the needs that they have following a disaster incident.
Gotcha. And what kind of disaster-related legal assistance are you able to provide to our older adults?
Well, that's a great question. So our services really cover a very, again, wide scope of legal issues. The basic rule is that folks applying for our assistance must have a disaster-related legal issue. And what exactly that compromises is pretty much any legal issue that can be logically related to a disaster.
Right.
So it does not have to be a strict issue like insurance or a FEMA appeal or something like that. It certainly can be an issue with your landlord, an issue with your HOA, anything that's tied in through a narrative to a disaster incident.
Right. And you mentioned FEMA, and we've heard a lot about the FEMA process. How exactly does FEMA process work, and how do you do, and what do you do actually, is what if FEMA denies your claim?
So that's a great question, and that's quite a question to tackle. So let me just sort of roll this back a little bit and start from the beginning. FEMA assistance is not automatic following a disaster impact. There's actually a number of steps that have to happen before we actually get to the point where disaster survivors can even apply for help. So first off, there must be a disaster impact. Once that occurs, there needs to actually be then a federal disaster declaration. After that happens, counties go out and start doing damage assessments to find out a general estimate of what sort of damage has happened to their particular area. Those damage assessments are then sent up to the state. They work together and they make a FEMA individual assistance request. There's actually two types of FEMA assistance that are offered following a disaster incident and a sufficient declaration. That's individual assistance and public assistance. Public assistance is a little bit confusing. It's a little bit of a misnomer. Most people think of, oh, public assistance. That's something that I would need to get help. It has nothing to do with individuals being able to actually apply for disaster assistance. Public assistance is solely focused on allowing municipalities to apply for repairs to their infrastructure. And there's a few other things that it can involve, such as houses of worship seeking repairs following a disaster. What we're really concerned about here with regard to FEMA is the individual assistance program. So if you meet that certain damage threshold and there's a request, FEMA can come in with an individual assistance program there. Under the individual assistance programs, there are a number of sub-programs actually that come into play. Most of what we think about when we're thinking about FEMA is the IHP program. That's Individuals in Housing Assistance Program. This is what allows people to apply directly to FEMA to get assistance for damage incurred following a disaster. There's also other little programs that we might be familiar with, such as the DRC program, that's Disaster Recovery Centers. These open up following a disaster. They're community centers where people can go to, speak to FEMA staff in person, and there's generally community partners there that provide additional services as well. Right now here in Pinellas County, we have one DRC opened at the Enoch Davis Center down in St. Petersburg. There was one open in Largo. That's not currently the case. And we don't exactly know how long it'll stay for, probably another few weeks, but that's still kind of up to FEMA and the county as to how long that DRC will be open. These are great centers to allow folks to go in to apply for FEMA assistance, to find out status of their FEMA application, and also to file appeals. Under the IA program, there's also things like Operation Blue Roof, which was active in our county. That is basically where the Army Corps of Engineers can come out and put tarps on people's roofs. So the IA program in general includes a lot of things, but specifically what we're talking about is the IHP ability so that people can actually apply for FEMA assistance. On that note too, if folks have been affected by both Helene and Milton, they need to apply separately. If they've applied for one storm, they're only entitled to get assistance for that particular storm. You must apply per storm to FEMA. The other thing about the FEMA application is if you fail to file within the deadline, you still file anyways. FEMA is generally very generous with accepting late applications and your ability to show good cause. So, if you are in a situation where FEMA says you are not going to give you assistance, it's very important to read the letter, because FEMA will send you a correspondence letter to indicate exactly why your assistance will not be provided. Oftentimes people think they have been denied when in actuality the correspondence is an information request in which the letter basically says, we can't give you assistance yet, you need to provide this additional information before we can process it. So if that is the case, folks need to make sure that they're providing FEMA with the information requested. If you do receive an outright denial, you are entitled to file an appeal with FEMA. Now, if you receive that denial, there's a letter and it indicates exactly the date of the decision. It's not the date that you received the letter. From that date, you have 60 days to file an appeal. However, I'll just note too, like the application period, If you are beyond the 60 days of that decision date, you should still file an appeal if you feel that you did not receive enough money or were outright denied any assistance at all.
Right. Wow, that's great information. Thank you. And so many of us submitted insurance claim to our homeowners insurance providers and have received denials or endless requests for information regarding our damages. What are our legal options and how do we navigate the insurance claim process?
So that's quite a broad question with regard to this, highly fact intensive when it comes down to insurance issues, but I'll try to get a little bit of guidance here on the issue. So struggling with insurance is going to be something that many survivors are going to encounter. My first suggestion, and really the most important thing that you can start with, is making sure to be extremely and intimately familiar with your insurance policy. Within that policy, it will indicate the policyholder's obligations to provide certain information when filing a claim. So there are many circumstances where we have policies and we have no idea what they say in them.
Right.
They're in some cabinet in the house, or you're not even sure where it is.
And the font are so tiny.
That's exactly right. But going through that policy is extremely important to make sure that you know your rights as a policyholder and exactly why, what information may be requested upon you if you're filing a claim.
Right.
So if you are looking online for self-help information, there is a great organization called United Policyholders. They have a website that provides a lot of good self-help information to help consumers understand their rights under policies. If you're very familiar with your policy, if you've gone through the self-help aspects and you're still fighting with the insurance company unable to get a claim, it's probably time to seek legal help at that time. There are a lot of factors that can go into a denial. It really takes a careful review of what's going on to make sure that a denial was inappropriate. Typically there's going to be an internal appeal process through the insurance company, so folks are entitled to appeal that if they feel that their claim was either denied improperly or too low for what their damages are. And if that fails, then the next step is to consider what legal options there may be beyond that.
And a consultation with an attorney would be appropriate at that time.
Certainly so.
Yes. We're going to take a short break, and when we return, Jason and I will continue our conversation about the legal perspective regarding hurricane recovery. So stay tuned for more.
I was told that I needed to sign up with FEMA because we may not know everything that has happened to this point. So the whole process was comforting. Please don't even question it. Just come on and talk to these folks. If you have questions about whether or not you're eligible, they'll tell you. It's good to know that there are people who know what's going on and help us through this.
We know this is an extremely difficult time for the families who have lost loved ones and communities who have been impacted by this storm. If you are a homeowner or renter whose home was damaged by the recent storm, FEMA has resources available to help you jumpstart your recovery. Please remember, if you have home or flood insurance, contact your insurance provider and file a claim as soon as possible. If you live in a county that has been identified for federal assistance for individuals and households, you can now apply for disaster assistance. There are 3 ways to apply. Go to disasterassistance.gov, call the FEMA helpline at 1-800-621-3362 to apply for assistance. If you use relay service, such as video relay, captioned telephone, or other service, give FEMA the number for that service. Or download the FEMA app to start the application process on your mobile device.
Welcome back to Aging on the Suncoast. I'm here with Jason Susalla. And to continue our conversation, you mentioned about landlord-tenant issues. So let's say a resident was renting a home from a landlord and the landlord sends an eviction notice because needed repairs must be done. What are the options for the person renting?
Well, I can tell you first off that the landlord does not have a right to evict an individual for needing to make repairs to a property. We see a lot of landlord-tenant issues following a storm. Landlords are doing a lot of things that they shouldn't, that are quite illegal, so that this is a very big area, and it's a good thing to talk about. Generally speaking, following a disaster incident, if a property has been damaged significantly to the point where it is uninhabitable, the tenant, and the tenant alone, has the authority under the Florida landlord-tenant statutes to terminate their lease with a notice to the landlord. Okay, that allows them, if they're in the middle of a lease term, to send a notice to the landlord, and they can vacate that property as soon as they want. This then terminates their lease so that they are no longer obligated to pay rent to the landlord, and the landlord can't come back on them and try to sue them for unpaid rent due under the remainder of the lease term. The landlord, however, does not have that right. So again, if we're talking about a property with substantial damage, the landlord cannot elect simply to terminate a tenant's lease at their discretion. This is something that we have seen landlords attempt to try to basically tell folks that you're not allowed to live here anymore, even though you have an active lease term, you must leave and you can't come back. So the landlord does have rights to certainly repair their properties. And what the proper procedure would be if a tenant, again, has an active lease, the landlord can inform the tenant by a proper and reasonable notice that they must move off the property temporarily. So upon giving that notice, the landlord then can go ahead and have the tenant move out temporarily and conduct their repairs. During this time, however, that the tenant is required to live off of the property, the landlord may not charge rent. They must abate the rent for the entirety of the time off on there. There are many little factors that kind of go into this, and this is certainly something that if someone has experienced this, they should reach out to us to go into more details. But generally speaking, the landlord does not have a right to end someone's tenancy or evict them just because they need to make repairs to the property.
I see. And we know that many residents are still in need of repairs of their homes due to the hurricane. How does a resident protect themselves when having to repair or do major renovation to their property?
That's a very good question, and what I can say first off with regard to this is survivors must be very cautious. Mm-hmm. When we're talking about this question, my mind immediately goes to hiring a contractor to make repairs on a property. And following a disaster incident, it's unfortunately true that many bad actors come into the area to try to take advantage of people. So contractors performing work must be licensed under the state. That's through the Department of Business and Professional Relations. And so when you are approached by a contractor or you approach a contractor, it's important to get their information, and it's important to look up their license to make sure that they're appropriately licensed under the state. Sometimes survivors are pretty desperate because contractors are not easy to find after an incident. So you may have a very friendly person approach you and say, yeah, I can do work, it'll be great. And a survivor may be apt to just accept that because it's something they very much need and not really look into it. And that person may simply take money and leave. And the remedies for a survivor in that situation are pretty limited. So this is why it's very important for a survivor to be cautious, to take a breath, to look into the background of these particular survivors. Now, there are certainly remedies too along the way, because not all contractors are bad actors. Sometimes contractors are just overwhelmed and they're not conducting work in the timely fashion. There are Florida laws that come into play here. If, for example, someone has entered into a contract and has paid a 10% or more deposit on a situation, a contractor must pull permits and begin work within a certain time frame. And if they fail to do so, there are penalties against that contractor. And in some circumstances, these penalties can be criminal. So sometimes it's pretty convincing to have a sheriff visit a contractor when they're not conducting the work they must do. The other item here that I'd like to suggest is that to look up a contractor's license to make sure that it's appropriate. They can go to the DBPR website to actually look up the license and everything there. But again, when it comes down to it, if these problems are not solvable by an individual, they ought to call us to get more detailed information about what they can do to protect themselves.
Great, that's great information. What should a resident do if they need legal assistance relating to the hurricanes, and how do they seek legal help?
So in the past few years, growing the disaster relief team, we have tried to make this as easy as possible because survivors are going through a lot. So really the way the state works is when it comes down to legal aid programs, there are many legal aid programs covering different counties in the state. Every county in the state is covered by a legal aid program, but for example, Bay Area Legal Services direct service area is Pasco County, Pinellas County, Hillsborough County, Manatee, and Sarasota counties.
Wow.
So folks in those direct counties can reach out to us and we can go ahead and assist them from anything from counsel and advice to representation in court. If folks are calling or reaching out to us outside of those counties, we have a very easy way for them to reach out, and that is the Florida Disaster Legal Aid Helpline. Does not matter where folks are in the state, whether they're in our direct service area or outside of our service area, they can call this number to apply for disaster-related legal aid.
What overall advice would you share with our viewers regarding navigating the hurricane recovery process from a legal perspective?
Well, what I can say more so than anything is that survivors undergo an extreme amount of fatigue. What has happened here in our region is unprecedented.
Right.
We talk about Helene and Milton, but sometimes we forget Debbie was even prior to those.
Right.
And we have had disaster declarations in Pinellas County for all three of those storms. Our area has not seen an impact like this within anyone's memory. The last time a storm surge was as high as it was for Helene was estimated to be in 1921 for the Tarpon Springs hurricane.
Right.
We are going to be in a recovery situation for 5 to 10 years at best.
Right.
So this is not a race, this is a marathon, it is about endurance. Folks will get aimless, folks will get desperate, folks will get exhausted. Sometimes it's helpful to have direction in some way or another. If any survivor is out there who thinks that they may benefit from simply talking to an attorney, reach out to us. We don't need someone who has a bona fide legal case to be able to open a case to at least discuss with them. Calling us is akin to going to a medical doctor's appointment. Sometimes it's not the best news, but at least you know and maybe have a little bit more of that direction in moving forward. So I implore people to be patient, to be persistent, to take a breath, and again, know that there are resources out there in long-term recovery that will become available as more time goes on. So even though there are resources coming in after a disaster, they have to often demobilize after some amount of time. But then in the longer-term aspect, other resources will be coming in, and there'll be other options for help to make sure that people can fully recover after these disasters.
Right. So from what you're saying, there's many resources out there to assist. So when you're unsure whether it is contacting contractor to help you doing the repair or the FEMA process or landlord-tenant issues, there are many resources
Certainly
available.
so.
Right. And I know my parents, my dad's 84, their house got flooded, and they're dealing with the process. And I'm sure they're not the only one in their neighborhood and in our areas. And I feel for them, and I see the drainage from this process
Right.
on them. And the advice you give is great. It is a marathon, not a sprint.
And I think you brought up another very good point, is that we're all in this together. A lot of us have all been affected by these very, very significant events. So it's not something that's isolated to one certain area. Our whole region has been very impacted, so we're kind of all in this survivor position together trying to get through the long-term recovery.
That's great. And I want to thank Jason again for joining us. We sincerely appreciate the work that you and other professionals in the legal field provide. It's important for all of us to be aware of our rights and the guidance we can seek if we are experiencing legal challenges related to the hurricane recovery. Throughout this episode and in the show notes, you will find a resource that can assist you if you are needing support. Our helpline can help connect you to legal assistance, as well as so many other services and programs. That number is 1-800-963-5337. We hope you learn a great deal from this month's broadcast and that you will join us for future episodes. Thank you for tuning in, and we will see you next month in another installment of Aging on the Suncoast.